Hey everyone, welcome back to a new video, and today we are going to be talking about a woman who I've seen mentioned all over Reddit recently, and that is Laura Wellington, who also goes by the name Doormat Mom, or Doormat Mom, but I'm not American, so it just sounds weird when I say that.
How many of you really good parents woke up one morning suddenly to realize that the majority of the problems you faced in coping with your ungrateful adult kids is that you actually had raised a narcissist and you never even realized it? It never even occurred to you because you had no idea what that meant at the time.
No. You don't need to pay for your adult child's health insurance. You have every right to take her off. You're not going to hand her a gift as she's kicking you out the door. My Lord. Don't worry about what the impact will be on whether or not you eventually reconcile.
The convenient double standard that ungrateful adult kids put forth when it comes to money, love, and their parents is rich.
I've just filmed a shorter video than normal, which it still took like an hour, but yeah, I asked recently over on Instagram. I've got two really big videos that I've been working on recently that the script's all done for. There's this one on Doormat Mum and one on Colin Hoover's Regretting You, and I asked over on Instagram which one you prefer to see first, and this one went out in the end, which is why you're seeing it first. But if you'd like to get involved in more little photos like that, or just see some of my personal photos and fun stuff like that, you can go follow me over on Instagram at Rachel Oates with a 0 if you want. But for now, let's get into Doormat Mum. And also thanks to everyone who voted for this. I'm a little limited with what I can film today with my camera battery, but we're going to get through as much of this as possible, and then I will hopefully film the next part another day. So if I change clothes or makeup halfway through, you know why. Or if I just look like I've been for a nap in between, that's why. So, Laura Wellington, Doormat Mum, is a woman with an estranged adult daughter who has decided to make several social media accounts and write a book about how awful and dreadful and terrible her daughter apparently is. She likes to tell everyone how she's the best mother in the world, and now she's doing everything she can to punish her daughter for trying to just set a boundary with her. She initially got quite big on TikTok and then followed up making a Facebook group for other parents who, well, it's meant to be for parents who are estranged from their kids, but it's all very bitter and very angry. And it's basically just parents who hate their kids and blame them for everything. And like I say, recently she has written a book called Doormat Mum No More, which we're going to be reviewing in some detail in this video. Problem is, this is without a doubt one of the most boring books I've ever read. It is just one long, incoherent, repetitive ramble from a place of anger and resentment, and it's exhausting to read. It's not even like so bad it's funny, it's just bad. Making this video has been a slog, and I've been at it for like a month and a bit because the book is just so boring that trying to create coherent, interesting content from it has been a challenge. The thing is though, her TikTok content is the same as well, and we're also going to be looking at a few of those videos as well. I don't quite understand how she's garnered the audience that she has, but then again I think it's because she's offering a safe space for other angry people to feel angry and justified in their anger too. I think she also has a few hate watchers, so I'm assuming that's where her audience comes from, angry people and hate watchers. The Facebook group is the same as well. It's just these parents sitting around talking angrily about how awful their kids are, which of course couldn't possibly be their fault because they're perfect parents and they've never done anything wrong, and they all egg each other on to stay angry and wallow in their anger, and it's all quite sad to see. It feels very much like an unhealthy echo chamber. In regards to estranged parents and kids, it's a really tough topic, and it's one that deserves to be handled with sensitivity. In some ways I can relate to the kids' side in that I've definitely had to set boundaries with my own parents and take steps back at times, in order to have time alone to heal and work through stuff, and also have time to kind of like repair that relationship between us. And it's never linear, it's always kind of back and forth of frustrations and upsets and making up and repairing things and then taking some steps back, and it's very up and down, it's very complicated. If you have a difficult relationship with your parents, it's never going to be the same as someone else's relationship with their, every case is completely unique. And of course, I feel for the parents in those situations as well, because, unless it's like a cut and dry case of them being incredibly abusive, there's never generally a bad guy. It's just, it's tough. The problem with this, though, is that it's very hard to have sympathy for Laura, Doormat Mum, Not necessarily because anything she did to her kid in the past, but because of how she's treating her now and her behaviour now. In summary, her daughter tried to save her mum a trip across the world. There were a few instances where the mum was disrespectful of the daughter and rude. The daughter set a boundary saying, you know what, maybe it would be better if you didn't come to my wedding. We'll come to you in America and have a second wedding party over there that you can attend. And then the mum just, well, here's the other thing. We don't know the exact reason Laura had for setting this boundary. The mother never tells us and claims she doesn't know herself, but we can read into it a little bit with context clues, but we still don't really know, and we've not heard her side of things. But in response to setting this one boundary, Laura, the mother, had two choices here. She could, one, respect her daughter's wishes, try to understand where she was coming from, keep going to therapy as her daughter asked her to, and start trying to improve her relationship with her daughter while still giving her space and, just taking time to heal together. Or two, she could turn to anger, call her daughter every name under the sun, paint herself as an infallible saint, and try and ruin her daughter's wedding by publicly releasing a book insulting her for 180 pages on the same week as her wedding. Doormat Mum chose the second option, and that's why I find it very hard to have sympathy for her in this situation. There's some things where I do not necessarily understand where she's coming. Like, I have sympathy for her, but I still think she's in the wrong, and she's done a lot more harm than she claims has been done to her. Laura also uses her religious beliefs often as a shield for a lot of criticism, and she likes to make the argument of, like, even if your kids hate you, it's okay because you're doing what God wants. I'm paraphrasing, but you see it throughout her books and her TikTok content and so on. First up, I want to look a little bit at Laura's past, because it seems she's been making online content for quite some time now, but this is the first time she's really blown up and got a lot of attention. She started off writing a series of children's books, for example, My Laptop Was Lonely and I Wet the Bed, and then under the exact same pen name, author name as she wrote these children's books, she's also written adult erotica like Be Careful What You Wish For. Evie wished for an uncommon love. What she got was otherworldly. A man named Rick Remington. He'd opened her eyes to much more than a life of wealth and privilege. He'd help her see a bond that crossed all boundaries when facing the unimaginable. Then find herself again as she answered the very statement that set their time together in motion. Be careful what you wish for. That is so poorly written. But do you really think it's sensible to be writing children's book and erotica under the same name, under the same author account, where kids can just stumble upon it? Because I don't. She's also tried writing a bunch of self-help books, for example a diet book titled The 4-Star Diet, based upon the wisdom of General Colin Powell and other ridiculously brilliant leaders, and relationship advice books like this one with chapters like Dick and Jane are not the same. Whoever convinced women that they are the same as men is a genius, and I say this sarcastically. Men and women are not the same, and never will be so long as sex exists between us. It may be inconvenient and unacceptable for some for ideological reasons, but that does not make it any less true. Men and women are different, from our unique anatomies up through how we use our brains. Our hardwiring is undeniably distinct, which will continue to stymie all claims of absolute sameness, as well as dramatically impact the manner in which both sexes approach dating. Sorry, I'm reading this, but it's hilarious, right? You enjoy this. For most women, dating is a means to an end, that end being marriage and children. Speak for yourself, love. For men, this may not be so. There are many dicks out there who are simply looking for a good time, which interpreted means as many Janes in their beds as physically possible on the way to their particular end. College campuses, local bars, and dating websites are full of them, as are airports, shopping malls, work environments, and just about everywhere else Jane roams. None of this behaviour is new, mind you, except for the fact that it seems more open and widely tolerated than ever before. Additionally, certain Janes feel the need to mimic Dick's unruly behaviour, proof to the rest of the world of just how grown up and closely similar to the opposite sex they are. Those women who don't play along basically get tossed from the sandbox, which is not nice and quite deserving of a trip to the principal's office and a cautionary note home to the parents if you ask me. There's no doubt that we women have complete control over whom we share our cookies with, but to correlate that blatant satisfaction of basic primal urges with that of some newfound awakening among women is rather daft. Jane may play with dogs, but she shouldn't strive to become one or lie down with all of them, nor should she adopt a one-size-fits-all policy when none of what's included fits her persona or overall life. It's just misogynistic nonsense, and it's so poorly oh god. I think this tells you a lot about who she is and how she thinks. Bear that in mind going forward. I could probably make a whole video about that book, but I really don't want to buy it. Today, the focus is on her latest book, which is titled Doormat Mom No More, When Good Parents Finally Say Enough to Their Ungrateful Adult Children. First up, let's take a look at the Amazon listing, because the description is quite revealing in itself. This author is viral on TikTok for igniting the conversation between good parents and their ungrateful adult children. Thus, many adult kid trolls are leaving 1-star reviews here to crush the book and conversation, resulting in even more reason that good parents should get it. I think it might be a little more accurate to say this author is viral on TikTok because people are shocked she is publicly shaming her daughter, but I think it's quite funny that you have to be like, hey, if you see bad reviews, okay, they're not real, it's just troll, like, come on, if that's the first thing you have to say about your book to sell it, not the best sign, is it? Did you leap tall buildings in a single bound for your kids while raising them? Love them, sacrifice for them, support them. Do whatever it took to be the best parent that you could be, minus a few unremarkable mistakes, no worse than any other parent made? Did you attempt to give them the world? And now that they're all grown up, they behave as if they are completely ungrateful towards you. They criticize your parenting of them, demand that everything you gave them you owed, and insist that nothing of what you did for them was good enough. None of it warrants appreciation, a relationship, or even a visit. And you, tired of being a doormat for them, have finally said, enough, yourself. This book is for you. Calm down, baby. Sorry, Kyrie needs a wee. Give me 1 second. There's an epidemic going on in the United States where really good parents are coping with really ungrateful adult children. No longer are they willing to accept the shame, blame, or insane treatment that these kids dish out. Thousands of good parents are banding together and speaking up regarding where the fault for this mania truly lies, as well as what they are doing to cope. If you are one of them, this book is for you. Rambling nonsense, isn't it? Rambling nonsense. Right, I'm taking the little one out. Give me a second. Okay, hey everyone, I am back as just voiceover me because, yeah, I've just been struggling to get on camera again and I need to get this video done. So, okay, where were we? We just read the little description of her book and I think it's quite funny because other than like a few extra personal stories in this book about her daughter, name calling her daughter, and a couple of quotes from people in her Facebook group, she doesn't really say much else in this book that she hasn't already said in this book description, which I think just proves my point that this book did not have to be as long and boring as it is. Now, usually when I review a book like this, if you've seen any of the other videos on my channel, you may know this, I tend to go through chapter by chapter and talk about it, but this book is so repetitive and dull that instead I've decided to kind of mix it up a little bit. It's also very incoherent. It's very rambly. Things jump around, but not in like an interesting narrative kind of way, just in the like jumbled thoughts that haven't been planned out kind of way. So instead what I've done with this is I picked out a handful of passages I want to talk about and I've organised them into kind of themes and we're going to be talking about them like that, and I'm also going to bring in a couple of her TikTok videos as well where they kind of exemplify similar points and talk about it like that. But before we do that, and before we jump into, you know, splitting it up to be like this section, and whatever, we need to kind of understand the inciting incident which led to this book being written, and honestly, it kind of seems a little bit minor to me. We never really get a full explanation of what happened. I'm not sure Laura even fully understands or knows herself. I would kill to hear from the daughter's perspective in all this and see what she makes of it all, what she thinks happened. Like, that would be, but obviously, you know, that woman deserves her privacy, so we're not going to get it and we don't deserve it. But my point is, the story's just wild. We're going to briefly go over it here and then go into more detail with it later on, so bear with me. Chapter 1. The moment I realised I'd finally had enough. I just can't anymore. Those are the words that overtook me, the ones I finally accepted following the crushing disbelief that I felt upon hearing my youngest daughter tell me that I wouldn't be attending her wedding in Australia. I wasn't invited. I could hardly formulate a response. What was I supposed to say exactly? I was literally beside myself with shock. I mean, you literally weren't, but okay. I can't talk. I'm always using literally in the wrong way for like hyperbole and just make things sound more dramatic. I searched my thoughts, prodding them to make sense of this. Wasn't it no more than a week ago that the future groom arranged for a conversation with me in hopes of receiving my blessing after only 5 months of knowing my daughter? Or a month ago when my digital nomad of an adult child WhatsApped me from Vietnam, distraught that the wedding dress, the one that had already been fitted, would ultimately need further alterations. She'd gone to say to me that she'd have me make the necessary adjustments had I not been currently sitting in our family home halfway around the world, and me, a competent seamstress and her loving mother, answered that I would gladly do it anyway. Okay, so from what I can piece together from this and the rest of the book, the youngest daughter was a bit more independent than her other siblings, and she also chose like a less traditional, I guess like career path and lifestyle essentially. And the mother, Laura, didn't like this and refused to help pay for some of her education. When she'd kind of previously offered in the past, she sort of like rescinded that offer. And she basically said like, oh, well, I don't like my daughter's personality. I don't trust her personality, so I'm not going to pay for her to have an education. So the daughter took a different path. She ended up traveling around the world and getting engaged to a man in Australia. She then told her mum that she was having 2 wedding parties, one in America, one in Australia. The first one being in Australia because that's where she lives now. So obviously that was going to be the main one. She told her mum that she didn't have to come to the Australia one because, you know, it's a hell of a long way to travel. The mum got really, really offended. This led to the daughter eventually saying, I can't cope with this, please don't come. Hence the I just can't anymore line. And then the mother stopped speaking to her. The daughter cancelled the America party altogether. The mum set up this whole Doormat Mum thing online and decided to try and ruin her daughter's wedding by writing this book that we're reading right now, which calls her daughter all the names you can think of. And she decided to release it in the same week as her daughter's wedding to teach her daughter a lesson. Yeah. It doesn't really feel like the daughter did very much, especially not enough to warrant everything the mother has gone on to do since and is continuing to do. There's clearly some missing reasons here, right? Which we're going to talk about in a second. We don't know exactly what led to the daughter uninviting the mother, but it was clearly something. Laura never tells us specifically why the daughter didn't want her there. She just spends 180 pages disparaging her decision and her daughter as a person instead of trying to understand it or her or rebuild the relationship at all. I'm not saying you always have to understand the reasons behind a person hurting you, but I think in this case, if it was a family member who just like suddenly out of nowhere turned on you, wouldn't you want to know why? Wouldn't you question it a bit more, like even just to yourself, even in private? People who study estranged parents and children call this the missing reasons, and there's a great website about it that has done a lot of studies into it and also looked at a lot of online forums of estranged parents and the things they say online, and we're going to be referring to that a few times in this video. That website says members of estranged parents forums often say that their children never gave them any reasons for the estrangement, then turn around and reveal that their children did tell them why, but the reasons their children give, the infamous missing reasons, are missing. So, like I said, we'll be talking about this in a whole lot more detail later. I've got a whole section on it, but keep it in mind as we go forward. And like I say, she reveals at the end of this book, Laura does, I chose to release this book the week of her wedding in Australia. Oddly, the collision of these 2 events somehow made sense to me and brought me comfort. They're entangled anyway, no doubt one leading to the other and both signifying new beginnings. Mine now includes all of you. And this just feels cruel and unnecessary, doesn't it? Like, clearly this book isn't actually about helping other estranged parents. It's about Laura trying to hurt her daughter. And I just find that absolutely awful, and I do think it needs calling out, you know? So let's look at the first category of content from this book and TikTok stuff that I pulled out, which I've titled, I'm a Wonderful Parent, the Best Parent. So without this section, the rest of the book falls apart. Nothing else Laura says really matters if she doesn't first convince us that she's an amazing parent and the innocent victim in all this. Sadly, I don't find her very convincing, but here we are. Let's take a look at what she has to say anyway. She opens the preface by saying, this book isn't for them, it is for you. One of the many really good parents who have finally reached the point of saying enough to their ungrateful adult kids. Those they spent years raising and even more time tiptoeing around just to keep their relationships alive. There are many of us such parents, despite the fact you wouldn't know it. Society has done a dandy job of silencing and shaming us all into submission and hiding. But we've grown weary. We've grown weary of breaking our backs from all the pandering, capitulating, and pacifying it's taken to swallow our adult kids' grand disrespect while they hold our hearts over our heads without care. We simply can't do it anymore. A few housekeeping notes to keep in mind. I write this book from the perspective of being a really good parent who has lived and practiced what she's preached. Yes, my professional career has included being a politics, culture, and parenting expert, writer, and guest appearing on talk and news platforms like Dr. Phil Primetime, Fox and Friends, The Sean Hannity Show, The Larry Elder Show, The Epoch Times, and blah 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 blah. These aren't credentials that I care about. No, stop it. Do you ever get that feeling where if a person has to consistently go around telling us that you're a really good parent, despite the fact your actions literally show otherwise, then they might not actually be a good parent? Now, Laura has had it tougher times, no one can deny that. She lost her husband and the father of her kids when she was just 35, and that has got to be difficult on anyone, and so she obviously gets a lot of my sympathy for that. And of course everyone knows how hard a lot of single parents work, and we should never ever diminish that. I guess it just rubs me the wrong way a little bit that we have this situation now where one of her kids is saying, hey, I feel hurt by some of your behaviour, and her response is, well, you shouldn't, I was super mum. And those are her exact words. She acknowledges that at times she's made mistakes, but she refuses to acknowledge that it's okay for her kids to be hurt by those mistakes. She's like, mistakes are normal, you shouldn't have anything to say about it, like, and she gets mad at her kids for being hurt by her. It's wild. She writes, at certain points onlookers would tell me that I had conquered being the supermom. The appreciation I felt at those words dimmed in comparison to the strength and pride I took in seeing my resilient, steady family and comfortable life evolve. Everyone pitched in to make it so. As a result, my children became highly competent people at very young ages, where once we were fragmented, we now worked as a team and we flourished. So onlookers said this about her, but apparently not her own children from what we know, so yeah. Suffice to say, at 58, I experienced a rather unexpected awakening, not unlike so many other parents had already experienced. To put it simply, good parents can wind up with adult children who are simply ungrateful, and among the many that do are those who are neither at fault nor let off easy. Yet they are automatically assigned all of the blame for their adult kids' toxic and unrelenting behaviour, regardless, simply because society's agenda-driven experts, culture warriors, and those who feed on hate deem it so. And this is a big thing she comes back to a lot. She thinks that if a child says like, oh, you hurt me for this and this reason, it's because that child is too woke. They have been listening too much to culture. They're just being snowflakes. There's a lot of really strong right-wing rhetoric in this book. It's a lot. Laura likes to make the distinction that horrible parents do exist, but so do good parents unjustly accused. Those who simply make normal mistakes and nothing more. This book is about them and for them. To lift the veil on what so many good parents are going through with adult children who show little grace, no gratitude, oodles of self-righteousness, and a penchant for bullying, not to mention elected or provoked estrangement when faced with boundaries that they just don't like. And a lot, or rather her only examples of why she's the best parent ever and deserves the title of supermom are just because she did basic parenting things. The basic things that you agreed to do when you decide to be a parent, She says, I kissed boo-boos, turned frowns upside down, and helped mend broken hearts, gratefully. Undoubtedly soothing your children's troubles always fix two hurts at the same time, theirs and yours. No phone calls or texts ever went unanswered. I drove her everywhere. I even orchestrated a make-up birthday party for her when her original plans suddenly went south. Suffice to say, I met my daughter at every conceivable turn of which I was aware, and I did so without earning the distasteful label of being a helicopter parent. I encouraged solid character, morals, and values, including hard work, independence, charity, and resourcefulness. I rewarded these with trust and freedom. Then, when my daughter requested to attend an arts high school part-time, I agreed to that too. Not an easy achievement to be accepted into the program, I recognised this, and ultimately decided so long as she kept her core grades up, I'd allow her to go. She did. And of course, I'm glad she did all this, but I think things like, caring for your kids when they're upset and sending them to a good school, is that not the bare minimum of what a parent is supposed to do? In the nicest way, this doesn't mean that she wasn't neglectful or hurtful, perhaps emotionally, in other areas, This feels a bit like, do you remember that YouTuber, Brooke House, who was caught literally spitting on her dog and beating him on camera? It was horrible. This feels a bit like if her response to being called out for that was, but I still feed him every day, so I don't get why you're calling me a bad pet owner. I don't get why he doesn't love me. It feels like that. It feels like there's maybe things that she did do that she's not acknowledging that hurt her kids, or in some cases she does kind of vaguely acknowledge. we'll hear a story later of her body shaming her daughter and her daughter being upset over it and her being like, oh, I didn't even do anything wrong. There's cases where she's like, oh yeah, of course I made mistakes, but they're just normal mistakes. Everyone does them, so I don't need to apologize for them. So, yeah, it's interesting as well because in some of the passages where she's trying to paint herself as a perfect mother, she's actually showing how even early on in her daughter's life, her daughter was pulling away from her. And again, we have to ask why. She says, while the daughter was at uni, when she visited home, I bought tickets that made these returns possible and either picked her up from the airport myself or paid for a reliable car service to fetch her. She was then greeted with a warm welcome from me, along with a refrigerator full of her preferred cuisine, a clean room, and a comfy bed. I crammed these preparations between both work and sleep, so important was it to me that she'd enjoy a comfy stay. During these trips, she'd spend a great deal of time with her high school friends, each one welcomed into our home and invited for dinner. More times than not, however, she'd elect to remain at their homes, with me waiting patiently for her return. Refraining from taking these absences personally, I couldn't help but begin to wonder. She'd spend subsequent moments with her brothers and sisters, invariably the rest would fall to me. And I think this is just really normal for a young woman to want to spend the majority of her time with her friends, her siblings, and then her parents. Like, I don't see anything wrong with the daughter's behaviour here. And I mean, at this point, the daughter is an adult, so it's not like the mum owes her a place to stay or nice food or anything like that. But I think if you're offering a guest a place to stay, which is what she's essentially doing with her adult daughter here, then this is just the polite thing to do. This is a normal thing to do. You get food in for them. You give them a clean room and a bed. Like, that's not going above and beyond, is it? So, I don't know. And even then, even when you have guests, the guest and or your children don't owe you all of their time. Like, you have to accept a point where, like, when your kids are adults, you're not gonna be their first priority every single time, and that's normal and that's okay. And again, let's look for those missing reasons here. Like, let's say the daughter was intentionally pulling away from her mum and wanting to spend less time with her mum and more time with her friends and more time out of the house. We should be asking why. Like, without knowing that why, it's really hard to make a judgment either way. And the thing is, like, I do actually really relate to the daughter here, because, like, back when I was at uni, I basically stopped going back to my parents' place after the first Christmas. Like, I'd go back once a year for, like, 4 days around Christmas, and then just head back home to be with my friends the rest of the time. And I have my own personal reasons for doing that. But you know what my parents didn't do? They didn't decide to hold a grudge about it for the next 10 years and write a book calling me a selfish bitch. Instead, my mum in particular understood, and she gave me space, and she respected my independence. And in doing that, she definitely allowed that space between us to, like, kind of repair our relationship over time. And we're in a much, much better place now than, like, we've maybe ever been, which is fantastic. And I feel like Laura's not giving her daughter a chance to do that. If her daughter was holding some resentment towards her for whatever reason, or was feeling hurt by her for whatever reason, and she was saying, I mean, maybe not verbally, but in her actions, she was saying, I need space, I need time, her mother not giving her that, punishing her for asking for that, and now holding this massive grudge and being like, I'm gonna tell the whole world while you're a bitch on your wedding day, that's not gonna do anything to repair the relationship. It's just making everything worse, isn't it? Laura goes on to write, I had taken the parenting of my children very seriously. I'd been responsible. I'd been there. I had done the work of many, willingly and lovingly, devoid of any concern for myself, my health, my welfare. I'd always put my children first, and all I ever asked in return was for them to meet me halfway, lend a hand when asked, work to become the legacy of which their father would be proud, respect me, don't lie, show an appropriate amount of gratitude, stay out of trouble, don't abandon me in my old age, and never put me in a nursing home. That's it. Is that all? Like, that massive long list, is that all? If they ever came out loving me too, and I assume that they would, my life would be complete. There's nothing more that a good mother could want than to see her family thriving when under her wing, and especially when flying solo. Except you don't allow your kids to fly solo. Sorry. It's just a lot, isn't it? She really is asking so much of her kids. Like, even that one line about, like, to become a legacy of which their father would be proud of. Like, that is a lot of pressure you're putting on your kids. A lot, let's be honest. Yeah, the whole stuff about, like, don't abandon me, never put me in a nursing home. It's like, I mean, it would be great if your kids didn't do that, but at the same time, like, just because you chose to give birth to them, that doesn't mean they owe you that. Again, you are asking a hell of a lot. Like, you're asking them to look after an entire human being and all of their needs when they didn't sign up for that. And while obviously it's wonderful when kids do that for their parents, like, it's not something that should be expected or forced upon them. Do you know what I mean? And this actually leads us on to the next section that we can talk about, and that's her high expectations for her kids in general, and the idea that your kids always owe you something. Let's start by taking a look at this clip from her TikTok account.
Society has taught our adult kids from about the teenagers on that we should earn their respect. Let me say that again. We, good parents, should earn their respect. And the ungrateful ones in the bunch bought a hook, line, and sinker. Instead of, they should earn our respect. See, they expect respect to come as easily as unconditional love does, but they're two different things. So if you want parents' respect, it's simple. Earn it.
She really keeps coming back to this idea over and over in her book, this idea that kids owe you this and this and this and blah, blah, blah. And when they don't want to do what she wants, or they simply can't do what she wants, she blames, well, a whole bunch of stuff, really. She says the kids are ungrateful, rude, bad people, narcissists. It's a big bad woke society which has turned them against her. The Bible wouldn't like this. Jesus wouldn't do this. I'm basically Jesus. Look at me, I'm a martyr. And so on. She goes on to write, no longer will we allow our ungrateful adult children to bank on our commitment to them, nor our sacrifices for them. They need to pony up and show something in return. Respect to begin with. Loyalty, yes. And gratitude at a minimum. Is that really so much to ask? Well, it is if you've been mistreating them, but, how do we know what's happened? You won't tell us. The notion that adult kids don't owe good parents anything, or that they don't owe good parents anything because they didn't ask to be born, is such a crock. Yes, they do. If the gift of birth alone doesn't oblige them, certainly the love and sacrifice extolled by good parents should. It's not the asking or even the process of being birthed that incites the owing, although few people would give up the opportunity or their time on earth when pressed. It's everything else that comes after the fact that does. No one's parents asked to bring them into the world, but that didn't discharge generations of adult children from the obligations of behaving gratefully and respectfully. You kick a gift horse in the mouth and then cry, I owe you nothing. That's what today's adult children want their claim to fame to be. Sounds more like bad character to me. Most certainly, good parents are owed by their adult children, and it is a reflection of the unhealthy mindset of the current day society and a broken, godless culture that perpetuates the fallacy that they don't. It works against the preservation of the family unit as a whole and species survival at a baseline. I just could not disagree with this more. These kids didn't ask to be born, and you don't get to demand a whole bunch of stuff from them because you made the selfish choice to have kids. You chose to do that, and therefore you chose to accept the responsibilities that go along with it. There was no contract that these kids signed saying, yeah, absolutely, I'll do X, Y, and Z in return. You know? I know it's entirely different because, I'm not a parent, but I do have a dog. But when I adopted Kyra, I didn't do that with the expectation that she would love me and do X, Y, and Z for me. I made the choice to adopt her because I wanted to give her a better life, because I wanted to give her love and friendship and care. I didn't expect anything back. Of course, you hope that she's going to love you too, but that's not something that you can expect or demand from another living being. You offer love and care and you provide a safe home because you want them to be happy and safe and healthy, not because you want them to make you feel that way in return. Relationships are not transactional, and especially not relationships where one person is choosing to take care of a dependent. And that's what is happening when you have a child or you choose to adopt a pet, Those kinds of relationships especially should not be transactional because that's not healthy for anyone involved. And of course, at this point, Kyra does love me and she does care about me and she absolutely does provide me with so much emotional support when I need her, but that's because she chooses to. I'd never ask that of her or expect it of her, and I feel like it should be the same with kids. If you're only looking after them and providing apparent love so that they will, and I quote, never put you in a nursing home, then you're not doing anything for them selflessly or really for their benefit, are you? And I can completely understand why the kids would be upset by that. She likes to bring in the Bible quite often to back up her thoughts. Here is her quoting another woman from her Facebook group in regards to that. One mum said it this way: when the Bible says honour thy father and thy mother, nowhere does it say if they're worthy. My parents weren't easy, but I always honoured them. All families have dysfunction. And In another part of her book, she goes on to say, any adult child who chooses to neither appreciate nor value nor obey nor care for the very parents who took care of her from top to toe growing up isn't just being totally ungrateful, but committing an offense towards God, in my opinion. Conceit and callousness draw a direct line to conviction and chaos when children fail to honor their parents. And the insult is even more arresting when these kids remain indebted and living under the same roofs as the parents of whom they don't see the need to honor. Instead of feeling exceedingly fortunate and grateful for all their parents have done for them, they walk around as if they own the conversation and the room, neither of which they actually earned, unlike those who actually do, and then they complain that it still isn't good enough. And I find it so interesting that she keeps talking about how kids are self-absorbed and callous and conceited, when that's exactly how she comes across in this book. Also, let's not gloss over the fact that she basically, just wrote that her daughter's going to hell. She's like, you're committing an offense towards God. Like, that's basically saying, I expect you to rot in hell. And, I mean, obviously, I don't believe in heaven and hell, but she obviously does. And that's a really, when you believe that stuff, that is not a nice thing to say to someone. Especially not your own kid. A society that makes it perfectly alright for children, little or big, not to owe their parents anything is inviting nihilism, disarray, and extinction. Okay, yep, a little extreme, but if you say so. That is what it is doing. You think it is by accident that replacement rates in so many first world countries, including our own, aren't being met currently? Or that people are popping pills to regulate their mood and cope with their spiraling mental health like it's going out of style? Okay, slight aside here, but this is something I've never understood, right? The mindset of oh no, people now have access to medicine which benefits them and makes them healthier, therefore the whole world's going to crap. Oh no, no. People aren't taking more antidepressants now than before because there are more depressed people now. It's because people have better access to medicine, mental health support, there's less stigma around mental health issues. The fact that people are taking more antidepressants means that people are actually healthier and doing better than before, It's the increase in diagnosis of autism. It's not because there's more autistic people than before, it's because we're better at diagnosing it. That's what's happening now. It's not that there's more depressed people than before, it's that we're better at diagnosing it and treating it. That's it. It's a good thing. She goes on to write, adult children are not devoid of accountability. Society, however, teaches them that they are, that they owe no one anything, not even their parents. It greenlights them riding off into the sunset without looking back, so long as it makes them happy. Their personal happiness remains central to the world being completely right, and yet they are never happy. For this, parents get the blame too. It's enough to leave you bonkers. When you realise that nothing you will ever do will ever make a difference to your ungrateful adult kids, you eventually refrain from trying. Disillusionment finally sets in, and you ultimately refocus your efforts on more positive things. Does she even realise that she wouldn't have existed without me? I made sure that she was so well taken care of, her behaviour is sickening. Words from a good mother who had finally hit her limit. A lot of people online throw around this term accountability, and I don't think many of them really know what it means. It's not just like Laura here being like, ugh, children don't have accountability these days. You see it with men being like, oh, she is seeking trauma because she was raped. Ugh, women don't have accountability. Oh no, she made some mistakes and now she's changing her life. Ugh, women don't have accountability. Oh no, she needs medical help for X, Y, and Z issue. Women have no accountability. It's like, you don't know what accountability means, do you? And especially in this context here with adult children accountability and that sort of thing, right? No, I don't think kids should be held accountable for their parents' happiness and well-being if they don't want to be. That is madness. And what sort of heartless parent doesn't want their child to be happy or is annoyed that their child cares about their own needs? That is wild to me. I'm not normally one for being like, see, this thing happens in nature and then all humans must do it too. Yeah, but there are so many species of animals where the mothers will literally sacrifice themselves for their children. Female octopuses literally die caring for and hatching their babies. There's a spider called the black lace weaver who sits on a web while her babies hatch, and then the babies eat their little eggshells, and that's not enough energy to get them out into the world. So then she starts drumming on the strings of her web, and these vibrations basically tell the little ones exactly where she is and that it's time, so that they can all come and swarm her and eat her. And then she basically gives her life for her babies, which now, through eating their own mother, have enough energy to go out into the world by themselves and continue on the life cycle and, you know, be part of this big, beautiful ecosystem, you know? Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying humans should allow their kids to eat them. Don't go around telling people I said that, okay? I'm not pro-cannibalism here. but yeah, and I'm not even saying that, like, every human or parent should make big sacrifices for babies. I mean, like, I'm literally child-free by choice. I know I don't have it in me to make those kinds of big sacrifices that kids need, so I choose not to do it. But what I am saying is that it's entirely natural, or it should be entirely natural, for parents to want what's best for their kids and do whatever they can to help their kids go out into the world on their own and thrive on their own. So if you're the kind of person who doesn't want your kids to be happy and independent and thriving, then maybe that's something that you need to reassess in yourself instead of blaming your kids. Do you know what I mean? If you resent your children for being happy and independent, that's a you issue. You know what I'm saying? It is interesting too, because I read a few books on family estrangement in preparation for this video, and there's, I think, maybe one or two in particular I'm going to be quoting in this video, but I'll leave some other links and recommendations down in the video description. One of them is called We Don't Talk Anymore, Healing After Parents and Their Adult Children Become Estranged, and it's by Kathy McCoy. And she writes that mothers are more likely to become estranged as a result of continuing demands for closeness or giving unsolicited advice. This kind of estrangement can spring from conflicting needs and perceptions about how much contact is too much, what advice can feel like criticism, and what actions can feel intrusive. The mother may feel she's just being helpful. The daughter, or even daughter-in-law, may have a very different view. And this is something that we'll see coming up again later, in that Laura has absolutely been giving her daughter this unsolicited advice and criticizing her a lot for things, and Laura doesn't seem to realize that this is a bad thing, because it's like one of these things. And I think it all stems back to this idea of, like, parents resenting their kids for being independent. At a certain point, you can absolutely give advice if it's requested, and, you know, it's good to be supportive of your kids, but there is absolutely a line where it just becomes unhealthy and unhelpful, and your kids may start resenting you for it if you are being overly critical or anything like that, and you're not, or you're giving unsolicited advice, and you basically, what it comes down to is the fact that you're not respecting their independence. And like I say, this book talks about how that's one of the big reasons for estrangement and so on. And yeah, okay, I think I'm rambling at this point. Okay, so now, blaming her daughter for everything and painting the daughter as a villain in the cruelest way possible is something that Laura does throughout this entire book. And I think it's important that we look at that, and we will in a lot more detail in a few minutes. But first, I want to talk about the inciting incident in a little more detail, as I said earlier, and talk about those missing reasons. So as I mentioned, this story is actually really difficult to piece together in this book because she tells it in little drips and drabs, right? And it's all interspersed with rants about how society is too woke and her daughter's a bad person and she's like totally the best mum ever. And while we're drip-fed this story slowly in a non-linear fashion, it's also, when you kind of start to unravel it, it's clear that we're missing a fair amount of information. I still have a hell of a lot of questions about what happened. So we've already established that the youngest daughter, who thankfully is never named in this, is getting married in Australia. Laura lives in America, so big long distance there. As a compromise, the original plan was the daughter would have one party in Australia, one party in America. The daughter assumed the Australian party would be for the Australian family and friends, and the American party would be for the American family and friends. Laura assumed that she would be going to both, but the daughter didn't. So here's where she starts complaining about how the initial conversation about all this, like, it was a call from her daughter that woke her up at 8 a.m, and she's just angry about that. I sat up and redialed. We video conferenced using WhatsApp as usual. Immediately I learned of her wedding dress woes, including that of the seamstress denying her any further alterations. I offered to make them for her, but she declined. Logistics, she said. I understood. I took her at her word. Then, in a sudden turn of events, she blurted out, "You know that I love you, right?" Frankly, I was caught a bit off guard. I wondered where she was going with this perplexing question. I didn't have to wait long. She continued by saying that she recently began realizing that she needed to do a better job of taking care of me, her mother. Needless to say, I was startled by her words. I hadn't expected them, nor such deep-seated insight as this. Thoughts that she was finally maturing into the type of person that I'd worked so hard to cultivate flooded my head. At 25 years old, she seemed to be waking up, and I naturally contributed some of this development to the young man she was now in love with. So it sounds to me like the daughter here was trying to open a conversation with her mum to maybe eventually set some boundaries while still remaining respectful, and it's clear that she does still care about her mum. I see absolutely nothing wrong here. Okay, so Laura goes on and she says her future fiancé had told her about his and my conversation, and in that, the part where I noted that I would be showing up in Australia for their nuptials. Knowing that I would be hosting a second gathering to celebrate the happy event at home as well, she had not anticipated me attending the ceremony there too. A 3-step marital plan in place, at least 2 of those plans would include family and friends. I concluded that even if her wedding ceremony bumped up against the head of another one of my children's weddings now, I wouldn't miss it for anything. I vowed to figure it out. That said, it began to appear to me, however, that there might not be anything to figure out. As the conversation unfolded, it led me to conclude that she didn't want me in Australia among the other guests. So at this point in the story, the daughter has absolutely not uninvited her from the wedding. She's just genuinely concerned about her mother travelling literally the entire way across the globe. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but there are few longer journeys than from America to Australia, right? It's one of the longest, it's one of the furthest distances you can go in one go. It's, and her mother is a lot older. She's worried about her taking on too much. I kind of think her, like she even says it here, she'd not anticipated me attending the ceremony in Australia, That sounds to me like she's just thinking kind of like practically, she's trying to be thoughtful, and Laura's just reading into it and assigning malice where there was none. The daughter at this point doesn't say, and has never said, I don't want you there. The mother says, it led her to conclude that she didn't want me there, which are very, very different things. And Laura spends the whole book portraying it as the first thing. And I mean, let's be honest, right? A wedding and a party is like a huge thing. If on top of that you have the logistics of having to sort out your obviously quite needy mother, travelling halfway across the world, giving her somewhere to stay, looking after her the whole time, it just adds another layer of burdens. So I can see why the daughter would be like, hey, you don't need to come over here, we'll come to you, because it's a lot less work and stress in some ways, right? But of course, Laura does not see it this way. She writes that the call concluded shortly thereafter, and when it did, I drew a huge breath. The idea that she had to think about whether or not I would be allowed to attend her wedding in Australia was gobstopping. I didn't even know what to say nor how to shake the thought from my head. This, as another important celebration, loomed just hours away. I committed to quelling these disruptive thoughts for the moment, trusting that my daughter would ultimately come to her senses, possibly blame her insanity on her nervousness over the impending proposal. I might even receive these obscenely infrequent 2 little words. I'm sorry, I thought to myself. That's how much I trusted my daughter and the bond I thought we shared. So the daughter's like, hey, this is like a massive kind of change of plans to what I thought would happen. Give me some time to think about it. I need some time to figure out, to see if I have like the time, emotional capacity for all the work this involves. Like, it's going to mean some like changes to the wedding and the schedule. Like, and she's thinking this stuff through, which I think is completely reasonable. And Laura's like, oh my God, this is the ultimate betrayal. And this right here, what you've just read, is what sparked this whole book, several social media accounts, and all the, as we're going to see, horrible name calling of the daughter and just crazy stuff. Ridiculous. Just this. This is the big, terrible crime. So at this point, the daughter's still trying to include her mum in bits of wedding prep and asked her opinion on some stuff. Like, hey, here are some wedding dress options. Mum, what do you think? Which do you like? And instead of the mother being supportive, she just gives her so much judgment. My youngest daughter sent me photos of a few wedding dresses that she chose to try on during a stop in her travels. I thought the designs she opted for were a bit too revealing, thinking that her 2 brothers, as well as her fiancé's parents and brothers, would be in attendance on the day. As her choices challenged my personal comfort level, I felt it would be even worse for those noted above. So I told her and explained my reasoning behind it as sensitively as possible. It was my opinion, the same one that I thought she'd been asking for. I can attest to the fact that my words were not well received. Instead of taking them in the spirit with which they came, my daughter responded angrily. I'd received multiple bullet texts which accused me of calling her fat, something which I would never do and have never done. Not in my entire life as a mother have I ever ridiculed my daughter's appearance, nor my son's for that matter. Well, except in this conversation, clearly. That type of conversation wasn't part of our family culture. One would have to be completely out of touch not to realise how detrimental such actions could be, especially when raising girls. And yet, I suddenly found myself at the centre of being accused of exactly that. Even worse, The more I refused to agree that my intentions hadn't matched her interpretation, the more livid she became. Shocking, right? I continued to refuse to agree, nonetheless, leading to further bulleted texts, a period of silence between us, and a lecture as to how I should have handled the situation better. I decided that it was one of those moments I simply needed to let go of, despite how condescending her tone had been. As I mentioned before, we pick our battles as parents. And obviously, I'd hit an unexpected nerve. I deliberately took note of it. Then, during a subsequent conversation, I reminded her of my position, historically, on such things. I didn't apologise for calling her fat. That would have been extremely disingenuous of me to do, as those words had never crossed my mind, nor even my lips. What I did do instead was take responsibility for what I'd actually said, and left her to contend with what she heard. That was hers to work out in her head. So, she feels that your words hurt her, and that you were shaming her and her body, but you're like, no, I wasn't. I was just shaming your taste, and calling her essentially trashy, and saying she needs to be more modest because of, her brothers? Sorry, but what? So it's like, how does she not see how messed up things like her choices challenged my personal comfort level? Like, does she not see how messed up that is? Like, this is her dress, her body, her wedding, her choice. She shouldn't need to think about your comfort or her brother's comfort when choosing her own clothes. So the daughter clearly expressed that she was upset by this, and the mother was like, no, you're wrong for being upset. I'm not going to apologise. And then after this, the daughter's like, well, okay, I need to take a step back a little bit. And the mother starts bombarding her with phone calls and texts and emails, not only about why are you ignoring me, but so I'm going to be at the wedding. Am I coming to the wedding? I'm coming to the wedding. Definitely coming to the wedding. Just on and on and on. And apparently when the daughter finally replies, there was noticeable discomfort in her body language and a serious expression on her face. Yeah, you don't think. I asked how she was, small talk ensued, and then she told me of her decision not to include me on the guest list of the attendees at her wedding in Australia. She couldn't even sit and debate the issue for more than a week. That was hard to overlook. Clearly with the way she's handling it, this wasn't an easy decision for her. She's not doing it to be cruel. She's just trying to do it to, at this point, I think, look after herself. She's setting a boundary to protect herself, and I don't see anything wrong with that. Her mother is clearly causing stress in multiple areas, even when she's not even in the same country as her, and the daughter has had to make a difficult choice. Laura, though, still doesn't understand why she's decided this. She writes, I remained completely in the dark, grappling for even an inkling of anything that could explain this, especially as it seemed like she had no problem with me hosting the celebration she'd asked me to do back home after the fact. That was fine, this was not, and this was very, very wrong. It was then I decided that I didn't need any more answers than the ones I'd already gotten. What I actually needed, but it is so weirdly written, was to figure out what it was that I actually needed, including how I was going to come to digest the enormous kick in the bum that I'd just been given and move on. So Laura has a choice at this point. Like I say, she could give her daughter some time, some space, respect her boundaries, and try and repair the relationship. Instead, she's like, you know what? No, I'm going to get some revenge. She could have been like, hey, take all the time you need. I'm upset by this, but I love you and support you. I'll put all my effort into making the America party brilliant for you. But instead, she's like, no. When I woke up the next morning, following the few hours of sleep that I actually got, I did so with one thing on my mind. I simply had to withdraw my blessing. I felt as if I'd been robbed of it, that I'd been unknowingly lured into some kind of warped charade where my blessing actually mattered. But me? Well, I did not. Now my blessing remained entangled in this ridiculous ruse, and I needed to cut it loose. Truthfully, how could they expect otherwise? Their behaviour wasn't short of astounding, and I wouldn't allow this very sacred gift that I alone could give to be sullied. There was just too much meaning attached to it, including that of the continued respect and honour that I held for my late husband. In their recklessness, they had offended him too. She put so many random excessive commas in here. I thought I overused commas, but this is a lot. The entire escapade was completely intolerable, and it wouldn't be allowed to stand. So, like I say, she's like, I'm taking back my blessing and using your dead dad to shame you. It's petty, it's hurtful, it's mean. And also, she's like, oh my god, they're going to be so heartbroken without my blessing. It's the worst. She really thinks a lot of herself. Come on. Because of this behaviour and other behaviour towards towards her daughter, the future son-in-law blocks her on Facebook because he's like, wow, okay, this is inappropriate. Don't want this in my life. Blocked. And this just gets her even angrier. Laura says nothing good would come of it, just as no reply had come in response to my most recent Facebook note, as had been anticipated. Not even a single word in which to hang their hat on, just in case there was ever a reconciliation. I wasn't even worth that to them, or should I say, my daughter. Shortly thereafter, my future son-in-law would block me from his Facebook page altogether, but not before I caught a glimpse of their exotic Mediterranean engagement through photos that he shared. As their trip had been mentioned to me as a possibility, I peeked to see if it had been everything the two of them hoped it would be. When it seemed that it had, I turned my attention back to my own life and let them live theirs too. I took his blocking of me as a sign of their displeasure with my decision. He was also sending a stern message to me, denoting where his loyalty lied. It was exactly as he should have done, and I didn't fault him for it. I actually liked him even more as a result. I also felt a little sorry for him too, somehow not realizing that if she could treat her own mother and the rest of her family this way, she could treat him this way as well down the line, and probably would. It's something he'd unfortunately learn. So this line about, denoting where his loyalties lie, well, yeah, he should be loyal to his fiancée/wife, not to his mother-in-law who he's never even met. If my parents upset me, I'd expect a partner of mine to be on my side too. I think that's normal. The last paragraph, though, is so damn confusing because, she's assuming that her daughter will betray her husband because she set a boundary with her mother. It's insane. This woman really does think so little of her daughter, and it's kind of heartbreaking to see. So from this tiny bit of information we get about Laura and the relationship with her daughter, again, we don't know any detail, we don't know specifics, but from what we do know, Laura is very much trying to paint it as her daughter's the villain, but I think as an outsider looking in, we can see that I think it's quite easy to understand how things could have got this far, and the daughter's actions are entirely consistent with a child who has been emotionally hurt by their parents over and over and is finally pulling away. You know? Laura is writing this to villainize her daughter, not realizing how bad it makes her look, not the daughter. And as we mentioned earlier, Laura seems oblivious to the fact that her daughter may be hurting. She doesn't see it as a possibility that she could have done anything wrong here. Instead, she's like, well, if you're hurting, it's your fault. It's not me. I didn't do anything. I have nothing to apologize for. Stop it. She places all the blame on the daughter and acts like the daughter's purposely trying to be malicious towards her, instead of just being, a woman trying to protect herself. She flat out refuses to even hear her daughter out or anyone defending her. I can hear the critics screaming now, there are two sides to every story, in an effort to discredit me. They'd present my situation in a way that resembled my daughter and I standing in opposite corners of a ring, gloves fully laced up. That's hardly the case. The truth of the matter is, there aren't two sides to every story. This is one story, and an innumerable number of experiences within it. The fact that your adult child's experience was different from your own doesn't make hers right and yours wrong, and if she insists that it does and hangs the continuation of your relationship on your agreement, my advice would be to wish her and her experience a happy life together and bon voyage. 1 minute everything between you and your daughter is fine, nothing out of the ordinary has happened, your communication and relationship are status quo. Then out of nowhere, that's it. You are suddenly cut off from her, no word, no reason, absolutely zilch. She simply removes herself from your life and expects you to respect her wishes. It's an extremely cruel thing to do to parents, and it would be quite understandable if parents who suffered this never spoke to their adult children again, by choice. I don't recommend it, but I definitely understand it. So Kathy McCoy talks about kids who distance themselves from their parents, and she says, maybe you put distance between yourself and your parents because being close is just too painful. They have expectations that have little to do with the person you are and what you want for yourself. There are clashes over beliefs and traditions that have diverged over the years. There's criticism that though your parents insist that it's given with love, threatens to undermine your confidence at close range. I think this is what we're seeing in the case here with Laura and her daughter. Kathy goes on to write that for many, estrangement isn't a sudden event, but a process that takes place over time. It may be gradual loosening of ties as a result of life choices and events. It may have started with a specific conflict that led to angry silences and subsequently to an emotional chasm that took on a life of its own, or it may have evolved from erosion of intimacy and goodwill as the adult child has struggled for independence and the parent or parents have struggled to maintain close ties. It may have started with new alliances or with divergent views of a shared past. So, you can see here that experts in family estrangement acknowledge that on the side of the hurt party, estrangement is a gradual process with lots of little things building up, but that sometimes the one doing the hurting is oblivious to it all, and that's why it can come as a shock that it happened. That's why Laura's like, oh my god, this is such a shock. One day it was fine and then the next it wasn't. Whereas for the daughter, it was probably like, no, this was lots of little events building up to hurt her over time. This wasn't a shocking, oh my god, suddenly it's done thing for the daughter. This was gradual. And Kathy goes on to say that a recent study of estranged parents and children found that parents tended to blame the estrangement on sources outside of themselves, such as relationships they find objectionable. Adult children tended to attribute estrangement to the personal characteristics or behaviour of their parents, such as toxic behaviour or feeling unaccepted or unsupported. Sorry, Kara's making her bed in the background. It feels like this is it feels like this is exactly what we're seeing in Laura. She refuses to acknowledge that her behaviour may have played a part in this, and instead blames her daughter, her son-in-law, society in general, lack of like everything other than herself. She can't even see that she may have played even a small part in this. She's like, no, couldn't possibly be me at all. And it's interesting because Laura does kind of try and address this a little bit. She says that, of course, her and other parents have asked for reasons, but the children are just poor communicators and don't tell them. It's not that they're not willing to listen or understand, it's the children at fault, again. Others consider parenting the most thankless job in the world. For too many parents, that is how they see it, having been tossed to the curb, walked over, diminished, blamed, betrayed, and used by their adult children. And all the while, they never truly understood the why behind any of it. This is where critics will scream, did these parents even ask? Or did these parents ever ask in the right way? Seriously? Do you think that parents who have done everything under the sun for their adult children wouldn't think to ask why? And if need be, reframe the question in a myriad of ways in order to get a full answer? They probably did many times over. The sole burden doesn't fall only on them. Shouldn't the adult children be pushing resolution along too, if, in fact, they actually wanted a relationship with their parents? They are adults after all. Reality speaks, asking doesn't... that's such a weird way of phrasing it. Okay. Reality speaks, asking doesn't always result in telling. Plenty of good parents complain about their unanswered efforts in this regard, as if the continued cycle is preferred by these adult children. Others point out that their adult child's why never stops changing. It's the responsibility of the communicator to ensure that the listener fully grasps what is being said. Disagree, but okay. If the listener doesn't understand, the onus is on the communicator to continue to try to explain it until the listener achieves clarity. Adult children might not like that truth because it places accountability directly on their shoulders, but it doesn't make it any less true. Problem is, evidence suggests that this is typical of parents of estranged children, and that often, even when they are given a reason, they choose to ignore it. I mentioned earlier about the missing reasons, and like I say, there's a whole website where a study's been done into this, specifically looking at estranged parents online and their communications with each other, like on forums and social media and that sort of thing. The website says, and I mentioned this earlier, but it's important, so I'm going to read it to you again. Members of estranged parents forums often say their children never gave them any reason for the estrangement, then turn around and reveal that their children did tell them why. But the reasons that their children give, the infamous missing reasons, are missing. The website goes on to say, in the same vein, members who confront their estranged children reporting that their children screamed at them or used such foul language that I was shocked, but don't repeat anything their child said. When members do say what the allegations were, they paraphrase heavily, choosing the most trivial offences and trimming away all context. It's rare for a member of an estrangement forum to say why their child says they're estranged. Members prefer to give their own explanations, parental alienation, for example, or jealousy of the child's spouse, or they summarise the child's words as a bunch of lies or allegations of abuse. Most of the members are also desperate for their child to tell them their reasons, and this is exactly what we've seen from Laura again and again throughout this book, and we're going to continue to see as we read more and more. There's a few direct quotes from her daughter here and there, but overall she skims over a lot of what the daughter actually said, paraphrases, so we never get any definitive answers about why the daughter chose to set these boundaries that she did. There's another example of this at the start of chapter 3, which is titled Contemplating the How of It. Laura writes, understandably, I would spend many hours over the next few weeks reviewing my decision to take a step back from my own daughter. The fact is, it was inconceivable to me that she hadn't wanted me at her wedding. At the same time, I just couldn't imagine what crossed her fiancé and our future in-laws' minds when she told them the news. Oh, would I have been a fly on the wall for that conversation, or the many others that might have followed? I could only conclude that they'd been fed a version of my daughter's life, paltry by comparison, with me portrayed as only God knows what. How could I think otherwise? And yet, I was confident that given the opportunity to meet me, especially his parents, reconciling her words against the actual person would have been difficult to do. That truth alone could have been the single reason that I'd been banned, I thought to myself. I wasn't without my suspicions. At the same time, speculation would change nothing, which included my love for my daughter. I had always adored her. She was a miracle child, born moments before the official diagnosis of her father's cancer. I took that as a sign that God had really wanted her here in my arms. You know, I haven't really thought about that last bit before, but now I'm wondering if, like, the mother holds some sort of special resentment for her daughter because of that close timing. Crazy. Anyway, I just find it so interesting and a bit scary that she's so focused on painting her daughter as this evil master manipulator who, you know, it couldn't possibly be that she's genuinely hurt by something her mother's done. It has to be that she's a master manipulator who is lying to her new family and tricking them, and she's planned all this out, and now she's banning her mother to hurt her mother and to stop her lies being found out. No. How is that more likely than just, hey, you did something that hurt your daughter? Like, wild. Again, going back to the website that talks about this kind of estrangement stuff, and there's a section on it called Why Did They Do It? So their children's words can't reflect badly on them is the obvious reason. And this is in regards to, like, why do they skip over these reasons? Why do they not dive into them? Why do they not listen? Why do they not repeat them to others? And so on. So their children's words can't reflect badly on them is the obvious reason. Members who have aired their children's grievances outside the endlessly enabling warmth of estranged parents forums have been stung by people who took their children's sides, and they've learned not to give their opponents ammunition, which is kind of what we're seeing with Doormat Mom on TikTok, you know? But it runs deeper than that. Many members truly can't remember what their children said. Anything tinged with negative emotion, anything that makes them feel bad about themselves, shocks them so deeply that they block it out. They really can't remember anything but screaming. Their emotional amnesia shapes their entire lives, pushing them to associate only with people who won't criticize them, training their families to shelter them from blows so thoroughly that the softest protest feels like a fist to the face. But it runs even deeper than that. Posts in Estranged Parents forums are vague. Members recount stories with the fewest possible details, the least possible context, which is what we're seeing with Laura's book. They don't recreate entire scenes, repeat entire conversations, give entire text exchanges. They paraphrase hours of conversation away. The only element they describe in detail is their own grief or rage, nor do the other members press them for more information. This is what we see in Laura's book. When denial runs that deep, when avoidance is that inground, a person can't be separated from it any more than they could be separated from their bones. The denial part of this is especially so important to remember here when Laura goes on to write in her book, now what happens if their why has been clearly communicated to you and you agree that you were at fault? Then you have some mending to do. However, if their why just doesn't add up or falls into the category of designer trauma, fashionable and frivolous, you just need to put that to bed. You shouldn't be forced to agree to an accusation that is absolutely wrong in your eyes simply to pacify your daughter. That's lying to the two of you, and my friend, you will live to regret it. So, she acknowledges that some parents can mess up, but refuses to see that this could possibly be her. And she refuses to believe that any of the other parents in her Facebook group could possibly be like this either. It's... the amount of denial is just wild. It really, really is. And it's something that I've spoken about in other videos, but like, you don't get to decide whether you've hurt someone or not. That's up to the person who's been hurt, you know? Like, I've spoken before, I've had like moments in my past where like I've made a bad joke, like trying to fit in with a group or something, and like it's landed the wrong way because I didn't really understand the social situation. And where I was like trying to be like part of the group and fit in, and I was like, oh, I thought this is how friends interacted, but really it's gone on to hurt that person. Like, that's not on the person for taking offense. The problem was with me. Even though my intention wasn't to hurt their feelings, it did, and that required an apology, you know? It's something that people just have to learn if you actually care about other people's feelings, you know? Laura's first instinct in replying to people, though, is to tell them that, you know, as parents, they can't possibly be at fault. It must be the kid, it must be society, it must be anyone but the parent, you know? And I keep saying this, but let's look at some solid examples, and let's move on to the section of this I've titled, My Daughter is the Villain. So let's start with some vague TikTok videos which are trying to convince other parents that their kids are the problem, and look at some of the things she shares about her own daughter.
How many of you really good parents woke up one morning suddenly to realize that the majority of the problems you faced in coping with your ungrateful adult kids is that you actually had raised a narcissist and you never even realized it? It never even occurred to you because you had no idea what that meant at the time. And now you do. You're not alone. It's stunning. I decided not to hang up one of my adult child's stockings this year. Yeah, I still did them. And I decided not to hang hers up, not because I'm mourning the adult child whose behavior resulted in our estrangement. I'm mourning the adult child who I thought she was. And it's just too hard. Good parents fall into the situation of estrangement too. And it's not that they did anything wrong. It's the fault of their narcissistic victimhood mentality kids. And yet you're also ready to jump on the bandwagon of the child and shame parents who don't deserve it. That's so incredibly wrong. The reality is, if you really understood the full story, you might just change your mind. So don't be so ready to come in for the rescue because you might be saving the wrong person.
Every single point in these is laying the blame on someone else. She never admits, hey, maybe I messed up. Maybe there's something I should have apologized for. It's only ever, my only mistake was not realizing how terrible and evil she is. Oh, boo-hoo. And if she ever does admit to making mistakes, she's like, oh, they were just normal ones that everyone makes. I don't need to apologize for them. And it's like, come on, like, take some responsibility. After the daughter finally made her choice to not invite her mother to the wedding, apparently she said the words, I didn't think you'd be happy, but I figured since you're seeing a therapist now, you could work it out with her. Laura uses this to paint her as a massive villain. The brazenness of her comment added insult to injury. I couldn't believe my ears. And yet, there was no way around it. She had said those words so unsympathetically to boot. It left me searching my daughter's eyes in hopes that there remained even a glimmer of the person I thought I'd known still inside. She behaved like a stranger to me now. I couldn't get over it. Surely the eyes looking back at me couldn't be hers, I thought to myself. I was stunned by the possibility, as well as the notion that I could have misconstrued who my daughter actually was so completely. It feels over the top and dramatic, like you're describing a woman here who just said, hey, you know what? Maybe you could talk through this with your therapist. Like, you're not describing someone who just kicked a puppy or committed genocide, you know? She said maybe talk to your therapist. Wild. And I also feel like from the daughter's perspective, if I read that my mum had been not only saying this about me publicly, but charging people to read this that she was saying about me, I feel like, no, never again. Never speaking to you again. That's it, we're done. She then goes on to talk about how her daughter is evil, but it's not her fault because she was just born wrong. It wasn't that, she was a bad parent and caused this. No, she was born wrong. It's nature, not nurture, of course. It was once believed that human beings were born into this world as blank slates. In other words, who our children became was largely in the hands of parents. If parents screwed up, they simply reaped what they had sown in their adult children. That thinking changed, however. Science now... This is so wild. Science now believes that infants come into this world already pre-programmed to a certain extent. In fact, according to Russell A. Barkley, an American neuropsychologist... I don't know why I nearly said neurophysicist then. Neuropsychologist and internationally renowned expert in ADHD/ADD, babies are born with 400 psychological traits already formed within them. Those are traits pulled from the child's entire family tree, selectively and massively combined to make them into a one-of-kind individual that they are upon birth. She acts like the nature versus nurture argument has just been like, yep, we've got a conclusion, this is it, this is fact, it's all nature. That's not true. She's completely misrepresenting the situation here. And this expert here specifically was talking about neurodivergency, which is kind of different to just like, ooh, is your child going to be well behaved or not? Anyway, it gets wilder. I describe this recent revelation as God's nature to parents' nurture. He leaves his fingerprints on these babies and then we get to raise them, or shepherd them, as Barclay quite likes to call it. What that also means, however, is that parents only have so much control over who their kids turn out to be. This includes how their parenting styles are received by each individual child. Let's face it, if you've raised children to any extent, it doesn't take long for you to realise just how different babies can be from one another, even within the same family. No two kids are exactly alike, yet that's fine-ish. Dr. Richard A. Friedman, a professor of clinical psychiatry and director of the psychopharmacology clinic at Cornell Medical College in New York, wrote a wildly interesting column called Accepting That Good Parents May Plant Bad Seeds for the New York Times in 2010. In it, he shared that there were instances where loving, conscientious, dedicated parents had surprisingly raised unkind, uncaring, unsympathetic kids, even though you wouldn't think this could be possible. He went on to confirm that the good parent toxic child phenomenon inarguably existed. He didn't, however, remove all accountability from parents in every case. Which is fine, this makes sense. I mean, look at people like, oh god, actually, I don't know enough true crime stuff to, like, name people. But there's a lot of, like, murderers and people who hurt people and so on who had good parents who ended up still doing horrible things. That is absolutely a thing. But the fact here is, like, that's not what we're talking about in Laura's book. She's talking about her daughter saying, hey, maybe only come to one of my 2 wedding parties, yeah? And in response to that, her mother implies in a book that she is unkind, uncaring, unsympathetic. Like, she calls her a toxic child. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. Laura then goes on to write and say, maybe I'd been utterly duped and she actually hated me deep down. After years of manipulating my heart, she had finally decided to break it. It remains a mystery. And the thing is, like, I'm not saying kids can't be wrong. Kids can't treat their parents badly. They absolutely can and they do. I'm just saying in this case, we've not seen a single bit of evidence that the daughter is anything but a hurt child trying to set a boundary for her own well-being. There's no evidence of her being cruel or selfish or unkind or, manipulative or whatever it is that Laura tries to paint her as. Don't worry though, Laura covers this too, because she decides that if it's not her daughter who is at fault and evil, then it must be her new husband's fault because he's poisoning the daughter against her mother, obviously. Apparently she really liked him at first, but only after asking him a bunch of intrusive questions. The main question that I needed to ask my potential new son-in-law was whether or not he truly thought that he knew my daughter well enough to marry her. It had been such a short period of time for them both, I worried that neither had the appropriate insight into each other for such an important next step. That said, I also reminded myself that it wasn't my call, in the end. It was my concern, however, and it remained that way, as this answer was the least reassuring of all his responses. He still had a lot to discover about my daughter, I knew. At the same time, I really liked him overall. Sounds great, lovely. However, this quickly changes. Plenty of good parents have described situations where their adult kids and they shared a great relationship, only for it to suddenly go awry. The catalyst? Someone new walked into their adult child's life and changed everything. That happens, especially if your adult child became involved with a toxic person, especially a narcissist. Your adult child's mind is no longer her own, it is occupied by 2, and one wants all the space in it, leaving no space for you. So, a lot of books and experts on estrangement do say that actually, it's right. Getting a new partner or something like that can be a catalyst for estrangement. But that's only because usually it means the hurt party finally understands, like, what real love and support feels like. And they're like, oh crap, okay. And they finally realize how harmful the other relationship with, say, a parent was, or maybe having the partner means they finally have a support network behind them to cut off the people who've been hurt. There's lots of reasons for it. But no, in Laura's mind, apparently this means that her daughter's new partner is poisoning her and changing her and not just offering her much needed love and support, I guess. It's clear that a lot of this seems fueled by jealousy, even if Laura outright denies that, He was delighted that my daughter loved his family too, he said. This particular remark led to a story about the recent Christmas they all spent together. As was explained to me, my daughter seemed absolutely floored by the picture-perfect festivities encompassing the day, so much so in fact that he grew ever more smitten. The tale made me very happy, but it also left me somewhat perplexed. Something about my daughter's seemingly dramatic response didn't add up. It was just too extreme, in light of all that I knew about our own holidays over the years, especially Christmas. The magnitude of her reaction, as described to me, resembled that of someone who hadn't been so lovingly and generously cared for, in my opinion. I couldn't make sense of it, and even attempted to place the onus of my bewilderment on jealousy, mine perhaps. Especially knowing that my daughter had foregone a Christmas with her own family to remain in Australia with him and his. She conveyed to me at the time that as a result of me no longer agreeing to pay for her flights home, she'd stay put. She stated that it wasn't worth coming home when she had to come back again in a year for her sister's wedding. She'd rather use her funds to resume solo travelling instead. So, Laura can't possibly understand that her daughter may have been happy somewhere else and want to do something else, and maybe your Christmases weren't as happy as you thought they were. She's like, nope, see, she must be manipulative and lying. It can't possibly be that I didn't provide as good a life for her as I thought I did. Anyway, let's take a look at Laura's response to all of this, because as I briefly mentioned here, she didn't just take a step back and give her daughter space to heal. She decided that she needed to punish her daughter and encourages other parents to do the same with their kids. I'm titling this section, I'm separating myself. Or maybe it should be, I'm punishing you. First up, she wants credit for not being angry and violent when her daughter tried to respectfully set a boundary. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I didn't lash out at her. I simply stumbled through the obvious goodbye, then wished her well and hung up. I didn't know what to do after that either. I no longer had any desire for dinner. Okay, great. Good start. And if this is all you'd done, I'd been congratulating you for handling it maturely. But no. 2 decisions made up my only response. The first was that I needed to take a sabbatical from my daughter so that I could lick my wounds and figure out some things. It occurred to me that doing so might not even cause a hiccup in my daughter's life, despite how unnatural it felt to me. Ultimately, that made no difference. I needed this now. My health and welfare had to take precedence, a position I'd never taken before when it came to my kids. I'd never put myself ahead of them, it was foreign for me to do. Second, I would no longer rise to the occasion on her behalf. Johnny on the spot mum would suddenly disappear, with her doormat mum would go too. The duo had resulted in me being taken for granted. So yeah, taking a step back and giving her space is fine, brilliant, we'd love that. However, and then being like, and now I'm gonna refuse to do anything for you to punish you, it's not giving her space, it's just wanting her to be hurt. And also notice how she's like, my health and welfare had to take precedence. Absolutely fine, great, yes, you look after yourself. But she spends the whole book condemning her daughter for doing the same thing. Crazy. Anyway. And the thing is, like, when she's like, I no longer rise to the occasion, she's not just talking about, like, oh, I stopped buying her luxury items or something like that. It's more, it's crazy. It's more like this. Shortly after I initiated my needed break from my daughter, she found that she needed me again, at least momentarily. The irony was staggering. She needed my help in accessing particular paperwork in order to legally tie the knot. Her vagabond lifestyle, coupled with her decision to marry and take up residence in Australia, required me to lift a finger on her behalf. Not that she couldn't get around my involvement if necessary. I was confident that she could, but my help would have made it a whole lot easier and convenient for her. This time, however, I'd learned my lesson. The deaf ears she left me with were the same ones that had heard her plight. I remained unavailable. Not out of spite, it was. Nor because doing so was easy for me, it was. It wasn't. I refused to respond out of self-respect, as well as the desire to give my daughter exactly what she'd been asking for all along, whether or not she'd known it. She'd wanted out of my life, as demonstrated by our one-sided relationship, that I could no longer uphold. It had simply gotten too heavy, so I let her sit with both and removed myself from hers entirely. So, her daughter's not asking for the world. She's not asking for a mum to go out of her way for her, or do anything particularly special. She just needs access to legal documents, which you as her mother have, and you're like, nope, gonna withhold them to punish you and call your names publicly at the same time. This is so reminiscent of Ruby Frankie withholding her daughter's legal documents to punish her too. This isn't setting a boundary, it's abusive. And, oh, actually, at this point, I feel like I should have this in, at least, I don't know if here, but at least somewhere in the video. Laura seems to think that if we're not parents ourselves, then we're all terrible people, and we don't get a say in this. So I decided to speak to a parent who's actually been in a similar situation to Laura. My own mum. So now, my mum and dad are quite old now. My mum's coming up to 70. My dad's 74, 75, something like they're quite old, bless them. And they weren't at my sister's wedding, actually either of her weddings, because my sister decided to get married abroad. And first one was in New York, second one was in Gibraltar. I was at both of them. It was wonderful. I sobbed like a baby, especially the second time. And it was really, really lovely. But my parents don't have passports and they're quite old, so they couldn't go. So do you know what happened instead? I sent them a ton of photos of the day. I got a bunch of lovely prints done and sent them to my parents. My mum wished her well, sent her love, hope she had a great day. My mum was very, very supportive. And my mum didn't start a bunch of social media accounts calling her names and saying she was evil and going to hell. Wild, isn't it? I actually explained this whole situation to my mum and told her about Laura and the Doormat Mom thing, and I was like, jokingly, I was like, hey, you ever consider doing this? And to quote her, she said, no way would I ever think of doing that. How could anyone even contemplate doing it? So there you go. That's from a mother who has been in the same place as Laura. Wild, I know. And you know what happens when you actually support your children, your daughters in these things, even when, you're not physically at the wedding? It means your daughters support you too. Like, my sister's been taking my mum, and Sarah Jane's wife, Karen, actually, they've both been driving my mum to all her hospital appointments recently and looking after her and, doing all that stuff. Not because my mum expects it and demands it, but because they actually care about her and want to help her out and care about her health. That's what happens when you support your kids. They want to help you. It's... You don't get to demand that from your kids, but when you treat them with respect, you get it. Sorry. Anyway. So anyway, Laura, where were we? So her daughter initiated a boundary about one particular event, and Laura instead blew this up into my daughter is terrible and abusive, and now this. Saying enough is in your right, just as it's in your right to finally stop giving a crap about the why behind your child's experience. That broken record has to end sometime, and so does the act of perpetually trying to win your daughter over. Let her stay stuck if she wants to stay stuck. You don't need to. One mum said it like this: the door is closed. Putting up with being abused by a person I gave birth to is over the top. I can't make this any better. I don't fault her. If her intentions weren't met honourably, communication without comprehension isn't communication at all. You can't squeeze blood from a stone. And the levels of hypocrisy here are just insane. It's not okay for kids to set a boundary, but it's okay for parents to be like, I'm going to go out of my way to hurt you, and I'm not just cutting you off, but refusing to do anything, including inconveniencing you, withholding legal documents, and publicly shaming you, and blah blah blah. Also, notice how Laura has no problem with these parents saying that their kids are abusing them. It's abuse, it's abuse, it's abuse. But the minute a kid says, hey, I was abused by my parents, she just completely diminishes it. She laughs at it. She downplays it. It's horrible. We'll get to that in a second. It's coming up in the next section. But first, there's several TikToks about Laura calling kids setting basic boundaries abuse.
If you are giving your ungrateful adult kids more of a runway to treat you poorly than any other person alive, you need to stop that. Because you already gave them all of your love and support while raising them. That doesn't come with more of a runway. That comes with less.
Moms, you have to stop apologizing to your estranged kids. You do. Here's the deal. Just because their experience in the story of your lives together, they term horrible, doesn't invalidate your experience in your lives together. And if the only way that you can have a relationship with these kids is by acknowledging that their experience is the only one in the room, let them go. Because you still have an experience to live. They'll find the truth in time.
Just let them go.
So in summary, don't try and mend relationships with your kids, don't do anything nice for them, actively punish them and make life harder for them, and call setting boundaries abuse. Got it. Again, more hypocrisy here. Dr. Wayne W. Dyer was an American self-help author and motivational speaker. He passed away in 2015. The body of work he left behind is renowned. With it are several quotes, which he's quite famous for saying. One of my favourites is, "There are no justified resentments." In other words, stop blaming others. Start looking at your own accountability and contribution to the continuation of the issues at hand and the enduring conflict as well as feelings that go with it. Many parents complain that that is exactly what their adult children don't do, and in fact never do. It's crazy, isn't it? Like, yeah, great advice I get. Except she's not talking about herself here, she's talking about her kids. She's like, kids, don't hold resentments. Kids, stop blaming others. Kids, take accountability for yourself, blah blah blah. Everything's on you, but then she refuses to do any of that herself. It's, oh god, it's so sad. Choosing blame and resentment over forgiveness and understanding is a choice of which adult children can't reassign ownership. This is especially true if the parents have committed to doing everything in their power to move forward with their adult kids, including apologize therapy and working together to achieve a relationship where both can comfortably coexist. The lack of loyalty and cascading disloyalty is enormous among adult children. They hold on to their resentments and provide no way to atone or start fresh. At the same time, they expect their parents to forgive and forget on demand just because they love them. So if a parent messes up, kids aren't allowed to be resentful and must forgive them. But if a child sets a boundary, it's okay for parents to hold resentment and never forgive. That's what I'm hearing. We do, in quotation marks, still love our adult children, even among all the wounds that they never gave us. But that doesn't invalidate the unjustified behaviour that they refuse to take responsibility for. Nor does it mean that we have to continue to be receptive to it. One mum shared her frustration this way. The double standard is flooring. They vomit their feelings and complaints but refuse to hear ours, stating that they aren't responsible, it's always about them. This is literally what Laura's been doing for the entire book. Oh, I just cannot. There's a lot more of this too, where she's just like blaming the kids for everything and never accepting that parents can do anything wrong. And in this next section, which I title Gatekeeping Trauma, she begins to, you guessed it, gatekeep trauma and abuse and downplay when kids describe something as abusive, right? She claims that while abusive parents can exist, it only happens under her definition of abuse, and that most adult kids who claim they were abused are just making it up. It is vile. Here's a couple of TikTok clips for you, and then I'm going to go straight into reading a passage from her book.
There's a difference between accountability and coercive control. The first makes you a good parent. The second places you at the center of emotional manipulation. Know the difference when dealing with your adult kids, even if they don't or simply don't want you to. There is never any good reason to abuse a child or anyone else for that matter. At the same time, I charge that in certain cases, society has taught young adults that what is actually discipline is abuse. I'd also charge that there is a pink tote young adult trend going on where young adults abuse their parents. That is why this Doormat Mom No More TikTok group and the Doormat Mom No More Facebook group has grown so exponentially so quickly.
Good parents are forced to endure vicious comments such as, "You've done effed up if your kid wants nothing to do with you," or "Adult kids are more capable of identifying abuse today as they are better educated to the signs." Really? So ready are others to cast stones at glass houses. And yet, just taking those two remarks into account, the hypocrisy is stunning. In the first case, adult children are deemed so bad that they must remove themselves from their parents' lives. At the same time, they have the immense soundness of mind and educational acumen to be able to identify the situation around them better than their own parents and call it abuse. Which is it exactly? As it seems these adult children are having their cake and eating it too. That simply makes no good sense, as it infers that patients can be trusted to diagnose other patients accurately, when in fact they shouldn't be trusted to diagnose crap based on their lack of credentials and experience and youth. Sorry, I'm tripping on my words, I'm very angry. This is victim blaming nonsense. The idea that, like, well, if you're well enough to identify that you're being abused and need to get away from it, then it can't be real abuse, is so damn dangerous. Terrifying. And it's parts of the book like this where her responses are so aggressive and angry, and there's so much swearing. Like, you might have seen it in a couple of parts, and there's more parts like this where she's like genuinely aggressive and angry. And yeah, it's a bit like, you know, when you get those men who are like, well, not all men are violent. How dare you talk about men being violent? I'm not angry or aggressive. I'll show you. And they shout that angrily and aggressively, you know? Feels like that. Here's another TikTok clip for you.
So you literally live selflessly for years on end for people that you created and love more than life itself. And you do so because you want them to be happy, to have everything that they need and could ever dream of. You even leap tall buildings in a single bound to make that happen. And in the end, they come back and tell you that you did it all wrong. That instead of leaping tall buildings in a single bound, you should have swam under them. And had you, they wouldn't now be dealing with all this trauma. And they know you're the source of it because fictitious people around them tell them that you are, and they believe them. And that someday they're going to do better than you. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, mocking trauma is never a good move, and it's usually a sign you may be in the wrong. It only gets worse too. Listen to these bits. So here she goes on a rant about how if the parent has good memories from their children's childhood, but the child has bad memories, then the child's memories must be false, and they're at fault. How do they not remember good memories, and why are good parents the only ones who do? I've been told the phenomenon is called cognitive bias towards negative memory recall. In short, the brain remembers the bad over the good. That seems to be happening for certain, and in droves. It's terribly sad, because so much of the joy returned to good parents by these incredible experiences came from knowing that our children were grinning from ear to ear throughout them. Yeah, people tend to notice the bad stuff more than the good stuff because it hurts more. This isn't surprising. It's like, have you seen that terrible, like, screenshot meme thing that goes around online of this man texting a woman being like, I love you, I love you, I love you, you're a bitch, I love you, I love you, I love you. And then when she's like, excuse me, what? He's like, see, women always focus on the negative. It's like, well, yeah, because 10 good memories don't erase actual trauma and pain. Sometimes all it takes is one bad experience to sour the whole thing. That's a very normal part of, like, the human experience. It's exactly how abusive partners get you with the, well, I only hit you once, think about all the fun we've had together. I know, because I've heard and fallen for that time and time again. When in reality, no, once is enough, and it does outweigh the fun. Like, again, it's victim-blaming nonsense. This way of being like, oh, well, you know, just because they had a couple of bad memories, think about all the good ones, think about all the fun we had. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't. Yeah, so she gets worse too, and thinks that these adult children are having false memories out of convenience. It's awful for her to say this stuff, I can't believe it. As I already mentioned, false memories aren't fantasy. They can occur arising from suggestion, perception, misinformation, misattribution. I will add one, convenience. It boggles good parents' minds when they hear the reinterpretation of some of those stories. One mum shared, my daughter couldn't come up with a single good memory when I asked her. Not one. We had plenty. Another mum described walking on eggshells throughout her adult children's teenage years because it had been drilled into her head that 100 compliments would be overshadowed by one criticism. That seems to be accurate. Talking about criticism, good parents field savage remarks when their adult children reinvent or can't remember any good times whatsoever. The common theme seems to be that the bad times were so devastating that they squashed the good ones or erased the good from existence altogether. Can you understand how hurtful that can be for a parent who worked 2 jobs to provide her child with ballet lessons, only to have this redefined as manipulative or totally inconsequential? It isn't difficult to understand why plenty of parents regret having been so good to their adult children growing up. The notion that none of it mattered speaks of wasted lives. Nothing isn't traumatic to them. Enough. It seems to accurately portray how so many ungrateful adult children are viewed by parents. It makes them question why they even tried, when they could have saved themselves struggle, time, and money, or applied it to something or someone who would have actually appreciated their caring in the end. Again, it gets worse too when she starts talking about stuff like this. Mass formation psychosis is not a recognizable psychiatric term to describe delusional groupthink. However, it is a cultural term being used to describe it today. And there is a lot of it going around, I must say, including with regards to this issue. In the case of adult children, it seems that society has deluded them into thinking that they're allowed to have feelings and express them, but good parents are not. No matter how many buttons these adult children push, good parents' emotions and actions should remain in check. After all, they're the parents, right? This is also the part of the book where she starts lashing out and swearing at haters, or trolls, who are basically anyone who criticizes her or points out where she might be wrong. She says, yet this happens all the time. Well, that as well as criticisms from self-righteous know-it-alls who somehow believe that parents haven't gone to great lengths to understand and validate their adult children's emotions, experiences, issues, and opinions, only to find out that it still wasn't enough. Like this brainiac, and she quotes someone from her Facebook page, or maybe TikTok comments. Maybe your kid wouldn't have dropped you if you stopped to listen. You sound like a narcissist, figure it out much. Undoubtedly I did. I figured out exactly why this validation, expectation, and talking point has gotten so out of hand. Comments like the one above assume the worst of good parents, confirming this in the eyes of adult children, and making it even easier for them to choose not to grow up. They do quite a disservice to families. She starts calling everyone trolls. Personally, having been in the public eye for quite some time, I'm unbothered by their negativity. I realise that challenging the status quo always has its hurdles, more so no one understands my unique circumstances better than me, and given where I sit, wasting time entertaining or turning myself inside out over strangers' crass comments that assume the worst is exactly that, a waste of time. This is especially true when examples such as this one define their credibility. My birth giver would love you, you'd sound just alike. Birth giver? There's a wokeism if I ever heard one. I'd prefer to be considered a pariah than become part of the same illness that has affected our adult children to the point of calling their mothers birth givers. How disrespectful and ungrateful. If that means I remain misunderstood, so be it. It's wild. The irony of this being that she is more than happy for parents to call their kids spawn. Like, she's responded to a bunch of comments of women doing that. She's quoted women doing that. She's mentioned it in videos. She's replied to comments. Like, so dehumanizing name calling is fine in one direction but not the other. Okay, got ya. And then of course she brings religion into the mix too. Right back in the introduction to her book, she said, in addition, you may find that God is mentioned in a variety of ways throughout. I am a Christian and I wield my pen accordingly. As a Christian, I realised that I should forgive my daughter, but do it today? I couldn't. I was just too hurt. It was a conflict that added to the intense sorrow that I'd already been feeling. Thankfully, when I'd looked for a therapist, I'd found one who shared my love for the Lord. She goes on to say that parents only need to be good enough for their kids, and that that's enough for their kids to love them unconditionally, wait on them hand and foot as they get older, and that the kids shouldn't complain about it, because good enough is enough. She writes, one could even argue that if God wanted us to do better than good enough, he would have equipped us with the ability to make it happen. His perfect seems to be our good enough. The woke mob may quibble with this while foisting their own standards and practices on parents today, but that is just another attempt to eliminate God from his place in the dynamic. They want everyone to believe they know better when they actually know nothing, destroying the parent-child relationship while strengthening the societal-child relationship. Additionally, kids are being groomed to believe that they are their parents' peers even before they hit puberty. Let's not throw around big words like grooming, please. Stop it. Absolutely undermines the seriousness of them. Enormous influences such as entertainment and education are notorious for teaching children that what they learn outside the home is right and inside the home is wrong. In other words, stay close to your kids before the devil steals them away. It takes but a minute for him to do so, and once he has them, it's tough to get them back, I assure you. At the same time, no one will ever love your children more than a good mother and father. It is a biological and sacred link that can neither be eclipsed nor duplicated, for through it life emerges. Protecting them at all costs is in our DNA. You can't say that about any other bond. And yet you're happy to publicly shame your daughter and insult her repeatedly. Do you really think that is protecting her at all costs? If the love you are apparently showing for your daughter is the most love anyone will ever receive from anyone ever, then I don't think I want love at all, because this is horrifying. She writes, something is going on outside of parents never feeling the real illness being suffered comes from the lack of God in many young adults' lives. Until they invite him into their souls, they will never feel well, mentally or otherwise, because they are missing the pertinent nourishment that only he can provide. That said, parents shouldn't tolerate abuse from their adult kids, nor remove accountability or responsibility, simply because they refuse to believe or would rather pop a pill than truly heal. And if it's not lack of God that's the problem, apparently it's that society is just too easy for these damn kids, so they're just making up problems for funsies, apparently. First world countries have lost their way as a result of years of life being too damn good for them. When people have it too good, they assign happiness to all the wrong things. Society makes it so. Evil takes the helm. It birthed the saying, people who have the most are generally the least happy. And yet the prevalence of this insanity in our society currently is enormous. This mum shared her perspective of just how prevalent. They're running out of things to whine about, so instead they make up BS to have something. The victim mentality is all over the internet. Another sees tolerating this lunacy as part of family life in the United States. She said it only happens in the US, other countries don't have this problem, just us. And then she compares herself to Jesus, quoting the Bible, "Remember, if the world hates you, understand that it hated me first." In other words, you're in good company. Hold tight to that perspective. It will help you while the trolls are picking the flesh from your bones. In another place, she complains about how if a kid calls out their parent for an outdated idea, like saying something racist or homophobic, then that child is just trying to make their parents into a clone of them. It's absolutely crazy. Adult children don't have the right to ask their parents to change or conform to their way of thinking, and yet society continues to pound it into their heads that they do. These adult kids want their parents to obtain the same sick validation from the wrong places that they are. Someone needs to tell them that their parents are actually allowed to be who they were designed to be by God, of which no other approval or validation is needed. These adult kids would do well to follow suit. They'd finally feel whole. Frankly, it becomes tiring, draining, and destructive to have to constantly battle being fixed. At the same time, refusing to come around or capitulate doesn't make you a terrible person or a bad person. It makes you you, and you have every right to stay you, despite what your adult children think. Talk about breaking down communication and making it less and less palatable to be in the same room or around their adult children at all. Who exactly is the victim when adult children attack their parents for being themselves and not copies of them? And yet, if you turn the entire scenario around, these adult children would be the first ones to claim that their parents were abusing them. When parents are constantly being criticised and made to feel small and stupid by their adult children, it makes any time they spend together unsatisfying and draining. It really cuts to the bone and hurts. Is it any wonder so many good parents begin to back away from engaging? Oh god, this book is exhausting. That is pretty much the end of what I have to say about it. It's definitely a lot. It is too much. I found this whole book completely and utterly exhausting. But before we go, I just want to take a quick look at a couple of the reviews of this book, because they're quite funny. These are 1-star reviews, which Laura claims are just trolls. These are, verified purchasers of people who have read the book, reviewed the book, not just from the United States either, like she says. One person from the UK, one person from Australia. So people around the world are all criticising her. But she's just like, no, trolls, trolls, trolls. This person says, are you a parent who stomps all over your adult children's boundaries? Do you define the word respect as, because I'm your mum and older than you and you have to respect me despite me not listening to you, disrespecting you and your boundaries and upsetting you? Do you not take no for an answer? Can you not take responsibility for your own actions? Are you an accomplished gaslighter who twists things to play the victim? Do you believe that because your child gave birth, you are automatically entitled to take over the parental role and override any decisions made by the child's actual parents? If all of the above sound familiar, then this is the book for you. If you need validation in playing the victim, then this is the book for you. If you want someone to tell you it's okay to bully your own kids, then you're in the right. This is the book for you. I'd love to hear her children's perspectives, as the author sounds like she cannot cope with her offspring being able to think for themselves instead of just obediently bowing down to her. Another review said, Doormat Mom No More promises empowerment, but instead delivers a toxic, condescending guide that insults its readers while promoting a selfish, disconnected approach to parenting and life. Rather than offering practical advice, the book is a thinly veiled manifesto of resentment, rife with outdated stereotypes, and questionable, tough love strategies that do more harm than good. It doesn't empower readers to make healthier choices, it encourages them to adopt an unbalanced, entitled perspective that prioritizes their own convenience over meaningful relationships. And finally, one review from Australia said, this book contains red flag after red flag, and then just offers quotes from the book as examples. Like, how can she say these people are trolling when they're just quoting her words back to her? Crazy. But yeah, there you go. That's all I have to say on this. I am quite tired now. It's been, honestly, at this point, nearly 2 months I've been working on this video, so I'm a little tired, But you know, I'm glad it's out. I'm glad it's done. Well, I say I'm glad it's out. I've still got to edit this. But if you're watching this, then I'm glad it's out. But yeah, thank you so much for watching today. I appreciate you guys a lot. I hope you're okay with the voiceover for honestly most of this. But it's just a little easier for me to get through things at the minute if I'm not on camera. I'm still having ups and downs. I'm having more ups at the minute, which is good. I did actually really enjoy filming the last video about the Rebecca Goodwin situation. I don't know, that's the first time I've enjoyed filming in absolutely months, so that was nice. And filming the first part of this was quite nice as well, but I just got very tired after that. I've got my Colin Hoover video to film still. I'm reviewing her book Regretting You, which I regret reading. Terrible. Really, really terrible. I have so many things to say about that. I'm going to try and get on camera for that one, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, for now, thank you so much for watching today. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe. If you've been around a while, please check you're still subscribed. If you'd like to follow me over on Patreon, you can do. I post all sorts of like little photos and bits on there. I've got some extra videos on there and like behind the scenes stuff. And yeah, it's just quite fun. Oh, actually, I also have channel memberships, which I don't really push very much. They're just kind of there. But they're actually really cute because you get these like little special like emojis and stuff that you can use in like chats if a video premieres, or like in comments you get these cute little badges next to your name, which are really cute. I've got a few extra videos for members. I post some extra photos and little posts and stuff over on the members community tab, and I've also started doing this really fun thing where I do little trivia questions for members, which is just for I love trivia, I love quizzes, so I have started doing that over on my members tab as well. So if you're a member, please go check that out, it'll be fun. You guys are quite smart. I am appreciating seeing all your answers so far, which is really fun. But yeah, I just thought I'd give that a little shout out. Shout out. Oh, words are hard. I'm so tired. Okay, it is nearly midnight here, so I'm gonna go. But thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you guys, and I will see you again soon. Bye!